Good afternoon, welcome to the UK Column News. It is the 2nd of September 2014. Myself, Louise Collins, Brian Gerrish, Mike Robinson and Nick are here in Plymouth this afternoon.
Even,
yes.
Well, we'll just give a mention to the weather because I can tell you at 5:20 this morning the sky in Plymouth was absolutely clear. A lot of stars, spectacular. And of course the sun has come out today. And apparently it's even sunny in South Wales. So the people there that usually suffer the gloom of the South Wales coastline, I'm going to lose viewers very quickly as I continue. But today they've got a bit of sunshine, and I think that's in other parts of the country as well.
Can I just say it's likely to get sunnier in South Wales once the NATO conference starts and Russia starts nuking it?
Okay, we'll wait for that in due course, Mike. Thank you for that.
So, I think Mike's starting.
Yeah.
War.
Yeah, indeed. So this is another open letter, this time to Chancellor Merkel, from a group of what they describe as long-time veterans of the US intelligence community, including William Binney, who's former technical director of NSA, Larry Johnson from the CIA, David McMichael from the National Intelligence Council, Ray McGovern, US Army, and so on, a number of others. And they say, we take the unusual step of writing this open letter to you, Merkel, to ensure that you have the opportunity to be briefed on our views prior to the NATO summit on September the 4th, 5th. You need to know, for example, that accusations of a major Russian invasion in Ukraine appear not to be supported by reliable intelligence. Rather, the intelligence, in quotes, seems to be of the same dubious, politically fixed kind used 12 years ago to justify the US-led attack in Iraq. Well, in fact, I find it even less credible than the intelligence that they're talking about there, because, of course, the intelligence that's being used these days is the intelligence of Twitter and Facebook, and so there's no intelligence there at all. They go on to say, we saw no credible evidence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq then. We see no credible evidence of a Russian invasion now. 12 years ago, former Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, mindful of the flimsiness of the evidence on Iraq weapons of mass destruction, refused to join in the attack in Iraq. In our view, you should be appropriately suspicious of charges made by the US State Department and NATO officials alleging a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Then they go on to say, hopefully your advisors have reminded you of NATO Secretary-General Anders Fogh Rasmussen's checkered record for credibility. It appears to us that Rasmussen's speeches continue to be drafted by Washington. This was abundantly clear on the day before the US-led invasion of Iraq, when Danish Prime Minister told his parliament, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. This is not something we just believe, we know. So, of course, that was Rasmussen at the time. The situation demands a concerted effort for a ceasefire, which Kiev has so far been delaying. What is to be done at this point? In our view, Poroshenko and Yatsenyuk need to be told flat out that membership of NATO is not on the cards and that NATO has no intention of waging a proxy war with Russia, and especially not in support of the ragtag army of Ukraine. Other members of NATO need to be told the same thing. So this is once again, quite a strongly worded letter, open letter, this time to Merkel, from a group of reasonably credible people, really suggesting that the pressure for war against Russia is neither supported by the alleged intelligence, nor is it even a terribly sensible thing to do. Any comments?
Well, I just watched the whole thing, with sort of wry amusement. I know it's a very serious subject, but it's become so pathetic. We, of course, have not had any real intelligence on anything to do with Iraq or Syria, and now we're moving into the Ukraine. There was a comment that came through this morning. Now, I can't remember who said this, but it's one of the members of government within the Ukraine, and they said, well, Russia can hardly have invaded because more or less if they had, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
So we've got 1,000 Russian troops, we're told, have moved. How do we know that? No evidence produced. And so it goes on. And of course, I'm going to just mention David Cameron again in a minute, because this is the man, he's the only man we now see on TV telling us what's happening in Europe or Syria or elsewhere with no supporting evidence at all.
Right, well...
It's a scam, Mike, basically.
Indeed. But let's just remember what they said here again, that NATO has no intention of waging a proxy war with Russia. Well, of course, NATO has been waging a proxy war with Russia in Syria already. And in the meantime, another proxy war seems to be developing, this time in Iraq. So we've got Russia now providing attack helicopters to fight ISIS. Of course, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when this type of hardware is provided, of course, it comes with Russian military personnel in order to provide some support for that.
Inevitably,
yes.
The answer to that.
Right, okay. So this is the Moscow Times here, saying that Russia has delivered a batch of Mi-28 Night Hunter attack helicopters to Baghdad. But of course, here we go, because the New York Times here suggesting that, in fact, the US is now prepared to set aside its differences with Iran and to join up with Iran to help fight ISIS in Iraq as well. So now we have another front where the US and Russia seem to be coming head to head, and this, to me, looks like the beginnings of another proxy war. Now, it has to be said that Iran, at least publicly, is saying that it doesn't support closer ties with the United States on this. But in fact, I think it was yesterday, the New York Times was reporting what they called an unlikely alliance of American warplanes and Iranian-backed militias, which broke a siege in the Iraqi town of Amerli. So we need to watch this with continuing interest, I think, because this has also the potential to develop into yet another front in the US-Russian war, shall we say?
Yeah. And of course, we'll continue to point out that no in-depth analysis of the situation being done by the BBC whatsoever, just the pushing of what Mr. Cameron has and has not said.
Indeed. So in the meantime, the NATO conference is only a couple of days away, and there's going to be a massive fly-past of demonstrating our air supremacy. Apparently, the RAF's Red Arrows are going to be joined by aircraft from across the NATO alliance for a fly-past over the summit at Celtic Manor, I suppose it is, resort on Friday the 5th of September at 9 a.m. The planes, according to the government, will soar across South Wales, passing the National Assembly building at Cardiff Bay on the way to the summit. The display will showcase NATO's formidable air power, with aircraft from the UK, USA, Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, Poland, Portugal and the Netherlands. And frankly, it's the Polish aircraft which I find ultimately ironic, because of course they're MiGs. So this is NATO's new superiority is Russian technology, actually.
The Europe that we're watching being created at the moment is of course designed to be from the Atlantic to the Urals, so there's something very dark going on in the background. But this NATO summit seems to have become a showcase, isn't it? It's let's get the public out in the streets if we allow them out of the caged security arrangements, and then we're going to entertain them with NATO warplanes.
Well, indeed, beginning with an RAF Typhoon. This is the Typhoon that actually its targeting computer doesn't work, isn't that correct?
Or is it the RAF's Typhoon?
Can I just say, there's been a lot of buzz across sort of Facebook and social media. There could be this the perfect opportunity for some false flag attack to go on after what Cameron's come out and saying that highering ISIS. The threat level. And all this to do with ISIS, that it could be this going on this
well,
week.
If it happens, all we've got to do is look back at the film footage of Theresa May announcing that the threat assessment was being raised, because she starts stuttering over her words. You can then watch her blush, which to me is somebody saying something either they do not believe in, she's saying something she doesn't believe in, or she knows she's lying to the British public. Yeah. But Theresa May's demeanour when she announced the change in the anti or the terrorism alert state, I think very, very significant.
Okay, so it's not just our formidable air power, because our formidable ground forces as well, because NATO is preparing its 5,000 man rapid reaction force, and in order to respond to Russia, So the report here says Britain and its NATO allies will agree this week on an emergency force of up to 5,000 troops ready to deploy within 48 hours to respond to Russia's aggression in Ukraine. And I really just wanted to contrast that with the average May Day parade in Moscow, where they bring, for ceremonial purposes, more than 5,000 troops out onto the streets just to walk up and down on parade. So I really, it might seem like I'm sort of making fun of something here, but of course I'm highlighting or trying to highlight the absolute imbalance between conventional forces on each side. If there is going to be a war, if NATO is determined to force the West into a war with Russia, it's certainly not going to be one using conventional forces. And so I have to ask, what is the intention of NATO here? And if it is their intention to bring us into a war, then clearly that's going to end up beyond conventional forces, and extremely dangerous situation we're looking at the moment.
That's true. My personal opinion, though, is that the rhetoric will be ramped up. This is about pressure on Russia, and I think alongside that there's going to be a massive attempt to stir up unrest, civil unrest within Russia. And there's also been some reports circulating on the internet of US or retired US officials saying, well, essentially, Putin should just be removed. What they're intimating at is that somebody should shoot him or get rid of him in that way. So pretty serious stuff we're watching.
And in the meantime, of course, the economic war continues. And I just once again want to highlight the sort of difference in approach to economics between Cameron and Obama and the members of the countries that are sort of either already involved in BRICS or getting involved in BRICS. So here we have Egypt just coming out of massive civil unrest. They're building a second canal that we've highlighted before. They're reinvigorating other national projects, this one is to green another desert valley. We've got Russia and China entering a massive gas pipeline contract. We've got the Japanese taking the bullet train over to India. We've got India and Russia. Well, this is a bit of warfare here, perhaps, but a bit of arms manufacturing, but nonetheless, more sort of manufacturing, more production going on. And we've got India and Japan boosting cooperation in science and technology. And we've got all these countries around the world beginning to look like they're taking a slightly more positive outlook on life, while we seem to be determined just to blow the planet up. So pretty interesting dynamic going on at the moment, isn't it? And then finally, I just wanted to highlight this article, and I just recommend everybody has a read of this, because it's quite an interesting little article from Larry Elliott in The Guardian. He's their economics editor, and talking about exactly this type of thing, and just his language is quite interesting. He basically ends this up by saying, so RIP, the New World Order. He's talking about the Western financial system here. Born in Berlin, 1989, died with Lehman Brothers in September 2008, laid to rest, Eastern Ukraine, August 2014. Go and have a read at this blog post. Very interesting points that he's making, and the language is interesting as well.
Yeah. Well, just to end that section, really, I'm going to bring up again a slide from yesterday, which was pointing the finger at Cameron. Remember, this is the man now standing up on the world stage. He's going to be there in South Wales, threatening Russia, essentially, using NATO to do that. So this is David Cameron, who has absolutely decimated Britain's armed forces. These were some of the articles, a small selection that appeared in the national press with pictures of ships scrapped, or talking about aircraft scrapped, and senior officers from the military warning that we're becoming close to an untenable situation. So at home, David Cameron, absolute treason as he slaughters the armed forces. And then what does he do? Stands up on the world stage, sabre rattling. And of course, whose forces is he putting at risk? Well, maybe some European forces, but ultimately there's only one nation that can stand up to Russia, and that is the USA. So David Cameron happy to sacrifice American lives in support of his personal foreign policy. And we'll give you a reminder on this one as well, but we were talking about the so-called independent reviewer of terrorism yesterday, a QC called David Anderson. Now, he says on his website, totally independent of the government, but he advises and makes comments on the anti-terrorist powers that are coming in. We'd highlighted that the Met Police had warned anybody who was watching or disseminating the James Foley video could be committing a terrorism offence, but the Met couldn't back it up. We went to Mr. Anderson, but he wasn't going to give help. But surprisingly, here he is on the Today programme, so you can go and have a listen to this yourself. And he's talking about his concerns to do with anti-terrorist legislation. But he's also told us that the public's got to wait till his next report, which is July 2015. So the Met Police doesn't know what the law is. It's prepared to make it up on the hoof. But Mr. Anderson, let's just have a look at him. Here he is from the website. Says, don't worry, because I've got a report coming out in whatever it is, 6 or 7 months. So we've sent him an email this morning saying, could he explain to us a little bit more how he was appointed in that independent role. He's referred us to some information on the website, which we've still got to have a look at. But for viewers and listeners, if you fancy doing some research yourself, perhaps you'd like to delve into the background of this gentleman to see exactly how independent he is from government policy. And we're in a nation, I think, well, what's going on, Louise?
Okay.
Just incredible stuff, isn't it?
Okay, most people are going to be aware of Asher King, the little boy who has a brain tumour. Well, I'm just going to run through the timeline here of what's actually been happening to Asher and his family. On July the 22nd, Asher was diagnosed with a brain tumour. His brother Naveed King posted a video blog up on YouTube under Naveed King. He posted a video about the diagnosis of the brain tumour. On the 28th of July, Naveed posted just another video blog up of Asher in the hospital. The video is absolutely heartbreaking. It shows the parents around Asher whilst he's on drips and feed and awaiting more treatment. So for the next month, the Kings started researching Asher's form of cancer and were getting more concerned about the treatment that Asher was being given at Southampton Hospital. They started looking into proton therapy. They asked the NHS if they could go to Prague, Switzerland or America to get the proton beam therapy, but there was no funding available. The doctors wanted to treat Asher with the Milan Protocol. Now, I looked into what the Milan Protocol is, and to be honest, I wouldn't want my child undergoing 44 sessions of radiotherapy and the highest possible dose of chemotherapy. Proton beam therapy is an external beam radiotherapy that uses ionising radiation. The main advantage of the treatment is that it can precisely localise the radiation dose instead of going all over the brain and affecting other parts of the body. The family, who have a home in Spain, decided to flee after doctors at Southampton Hospital said that if they continued to ask questions regarding Asher's care, they would get a protection order against Asher instilled by the courts.
So we've got the state coming in straight away with a threat
because
here.
They're asking too many questions. The family asking too many questions, really concerned about the level of radiation and chemotherapy he's going to have. Right. They've checked out this proton therapy. The proton therapy centre over in Prague confirmed that they did have a place. That was on August the 20th. And they'd spoke to the father, Brett, and they said, yes, there's a place here. We need his medical records from the hospital. He gave the letters and all the information to the doctors at Southampton Hospital. Right. They never responded or got back to Prague. They then came out that they wanted to issue an order, protective order, over Asher. So Brett King decided he would go. They've got a house in Spain. They left the hospital with Asher, got to the ports, got over to Spain, and by this time Southampton police had put out a missing persons and an international arrest warrant for the Kings, and they went on news saying that Asher's drip and his feed would be running out and it was vital. So literally a manhunt went on. He was then found in Spain, in Malaga, because they got to their house and there were police everywhere, so they checked into a guest house in Malaga. If we can go to the next slide, Brian, we can go and have a look. It's this one. It's just this one here. Right.
So here's some of the reports. Obviously, papers. I believe on the Telegraph blog, there's a huge amount of comment.
There is,
this morning with people outraged.
But here it is. Here is the arrest. They are now in custody in Malaga in Spain. Nick Clegg has actually now come out and said it's very wrong that they should be reunited immediately with the parents, but then they've been told they need to stay in custody for 72 hours because they're refusing to be extradited back to the UK because they want to be there with their son. So that's where it all is at the moment. If we can go on, there's been a campaign set up at change.org, which has now reached, that's actually wrong, that figure, it's now reached over 140,000 signatures to reunite Asher with his parents. And the next slide here, the Brain Tumour Charity, they have said it's absolutely shocking that the poor little boy has been separated from his family, and it could cause him immense damage, that he needs to be with his family. So,
particularly because he doesn't speak Spanish, and he actually isn't going to know what is going on around him at the moment. He hasn't got a clue.
Even his younger brothers have been stopped from seeing him. They are now barred from the hospital. But say Nick Clegg has come out and said that they need to be reunited. On ITV, I think if you go on, here's the proton beam therapy, and the next slide here, but the one after that, Brian, is a couple who actually defied doctors' orders a while back.
Right, so this is an explanation which people can go and have a read about what is proton beam therapy.
Yeah, okay.
And this is the one where two smiling faces.
Absolutely. Alex Barnes, the little boy there, he was suffering with the same kind of brain tumour, and his mum, the British doctors were advising against going to proton therapy. She ignored the doctor's orders. She went over, she got the proton therapy, and there he is, healthy as anything. So it's really just the state, the police over-ramping it completely.
Well, I'm gonna say I think there's more to that. What this is corporate parenting.
Okay.
This is bodies of the state clearly now not even believing they know that they've got the power over children. So your children don't belong to you as mum and dad. They belong to the state.
Yep.
And if in this case the child's gone into the NHS, the moment the child is in the care of the NHS, then the NHS believe that they have got that corporate parenting role. Yep. They own the child. Nick Clegg, just despicable man. Yep. I don't think we're going to mention. Nick Clegg will be saying whatever he thinks he needs to say to get elected. Let's just push Nick Clegg to one side. What we've got here is parents being criminalised if they dare to go against the opinion and view of government agencies.
Exactly.
And we mentioned yesterday, of course, Linda Lewis from South Wales. She couldn't get a diagnosis on her daughter. The daughter actually had Zollinger's disease.
Yeah.
Hospitals weren't diagnosing properly. Terrible neglect within the NHS. So Linda takes her daughter overseas to Florida to get a medical opinion. She gets the correct diagnosis. And what happens? Neath Port Talbot Social Services arrive with the American police in that case, and the daughter's taken away, never to be returned home. So precedent for this in Linda Lewis's case as one case, but there are other cases.
There are.
So now we've got the British state demonstrating to the public that they own our children.
It's shocking. I mean, maybe we could get Kevin on for a chat on his thoughts on this case tomorrow, maybe.
Well, I think we should, but I think it's so important for people to get through the raw emotion of the case. Yes, we feel for the parents, it is terrible, but what we're watching here is something extremely dark. This is effectively the Nazi regime at work, which says your child belongs to the state, and if you're good and well behaved as a parent, you may enjoy the luxury of bringing them up. And it's coming now through all of the government agencies, the Home Office, Minister for Children and Families, etc.
I mean, they were actually trying to blame it and say that it was because they're Jehovah's Witnesses, they didn't want this certain treatment, but they do. They are. Yes, they are Jehovah's Witnesses, but they're not disputing. Not having the radiation, not having the chemo. They just don't want the way that we do it in this country. They want it just focused on one part, so it doesn't riddle little Asher with radiation. So, okay.
Well, we'll see
more
how
on it tomorrow. Naveed King.
We will see how that develops. Now we're going to thank John for sending this in to us. He picked up on the Daphne project, an EU project. And he said, were we aware of this, which we weren't. So we went and had a look on the website. And what this is vast amounts of European money, which over many years, going back into the 90s, money has been put forward for all sorts of initiatives to supposedly protect children. So we've had EU regional information and action on child abuse, telephone helplines for children and young people, child sex abuse, victims in Europe. It goes on and on and on and on. And here's the European Union in the background driving through policies to do with child abuse. And what we found particularly interesting is if you get into this, talking about aims and priorities of this initiative running through from 1997, setting up networks or reinforcement of networks at European level to promote and coordinate information and actions, measures aimed at protecting and preventing violence towards children, young people and women. So page after page of stuff which says that they're there to do the right thing. And we were particularly interested by this bit, the call for a community-wide child helpline was also from the political wish list. Now we're getting a clue as to what's going on in Britain at the moment. Where did the idea for the child helplines come from? Actually, political wish list. And the objective, which they admit they haven't achieved, is to actually get these sort of helplines pan-Europe. So we've now got the ability of the British state as just one to steal people's children. We've got a fishing net of helplines. All the victims are going to ring into those numbers, and then the state knows where all the vulnerable families are. Yeah. And who do we see at the back of it? Well, we've actually, of course, very quickly come into the European Union again. But at home, the evidence is surely right in front of our eyes. We've just recapped here on Cyril Smith and Lord Steele, the former Liberal leader. So he says in this Telegraph article that Cyril Smith admitted spanking and touching boys, but I let him stay. So we've got a very simple question. What is it about Lord Steele that he would think that a grown man who obviously gets a kick out of touching and abusing boys should be allowed to stay? Does Lord Steele have a different set of values to us? Well, keep that in your mind as we now do a little bit of revisiting as to what's been going on around children's homes. So yesterday we flagged up this very brave man, Mickey Summers, who's been abused through the child home system, so-called care system in UK. And at the moment he's targeting Nottingham and Nottingham City and County Council, of course, are busy saying, well, oh dear, we've suddenly lost all the case files on the abuse. And I'm going to say to people, remember that headline. The councils fail to find the abuse case files. Well, we also picked up yesterday that according to the National Archives, information regarding, well, this was one particular children's home, Brooklands in Somerset. The case had been, the information and case had been closed for 77 years. So the public in Britain only allowed to see information about this children's home and abuse in 2050. So you say, why would we want to close this down? There's only one answer: to protect establishment abusers. But what we didn't know yesterday was that there is a whole trail of similar children's care homes. So let's have a look at this one. This is Rose Cottage, closed for 75 years. So you'll get a glimpse of what dirty little dealings were going on there in 2037. We've got this one here, Candle House Children's Home in Southwell, closed for 75 years. You can't see it till 2047. We've got Broughton House near Newark, 75 years, 2041 if you live long enough for that. And on it goes. Rotherham, one here, closed for 82 years. And you're going to be allowed to see that in 2052. And as we always say, we're not making this stuff up. Here's Sunderland, another one closed for 80 years. And you're going to be able to see that 1st of January 2051. Well, what does the National Archives say? They say that they provide a toolkit to deal with sensitivity in review and transfer of public records. This is what we were particularly interested in. It says it's recognised that very occasionally a catalogue description may be considered exempt under freedom of information and should be withheld from the public until the record becomes open. For example, the names of victims of sexual assault that are protected by law. So what we are being led to believe is that these records have been closed in order to protect the victims. Well, nice one, but I don't think so. So we were very interested to start to discover that Beechwood in Nottingham, exactly the same process. So what we've got here is part of the records closed for 81 years. And if we get into the meat of it, here's Beechwood Residential Nursery. Lovely, isn't it? Beechwood Residential Nursery and Reception Unit, where children were raped, buggered, sexually assaulted, intimidated, threatened. And what's happened to the records? Well, basically, those records are closed for 75 years. So we're not going to open the lid on those till 2045.
Who would have access to those records, though? Who would be able to see those records?
Well, I anticipated a question along these lines. So we're going to say, who are the gatekeepers for these children records? And according to the National Archives, it's the Lord Chancellor who has control over whether these records are locked away. And so if we bring a few of these upstanding gentlemen to the fore, here we are. We've got some interesting names. Lord Havers is in there, actually, second from last, which might interest a few people. We've got Lord Irvine. We've, of course, got Lord Falconer. And if we come up to date a little bit, well, here's some very interesting names, because we've got Jack Straw. Now, he produced legislation making it more difficult for children who were abused in care to speak out. And we've got Kenneth Clark, the man who believes in secret courts. And we've got supposedly squeaky clean Chris Grayling. Now, what we don't know at the moment is which of these gentlemen have actually shut these records down. But I'm going to say, in my opinion, you only want to close records for 80 years if you are deeply worried about what those records contain and who they implicate. According to evidence coming into the UK column, I know Bill Maloney is the same, and as we'll see shortly, Exaro is also heading down the same path. Of course, those children's homes records have been closed in order to protect politicians and members of the establishment. But in Nottingham, oh dear, the chief executive has suddenly said he's going to resign. So here we are, Nottinghamshire County Council CEO Mick Burrows is going to stand down. Is it a coincidence that Nottingham County Council and Nottingham City Council held joint responsibility for Beechwood Children's Home? And this is a very important article from Exaro. Encourage people to go and read this for themselves. But they are exposing that Scotland Yard has delayed 200 charges over claims of child sex abuse because the Met is worried about a media frenzy over a paedophile network at Westminster. And there's a comment there. This looks like it's been done for presentational reasons. So we're dealing with the serious sexual abuse of children by people who are running the country, and what is Scotland Yard doing protecting them? So Exaro's got another article embedded in this one, the CPS to reinstate key charges after they made an error over Elm Guesthouse. Now remember, this is the CPS that has worked to make sure that Beechwood child abuse victim Melanie Shaw has been banged up in solitary confinement in HM Prison, Peterborough. But they made a mistake over the evidence to do with abuse by senior politicians. So it said Exaro revealed last December that the CPS had withdrawn 4 charges based on accusations by one witness, but made a serious mistake about the evidence gathered by the Metropolitan Police Service's paedophile unit under Operation Fernbridge. It led to an adverse view of the witness's credibility. Mm-hmm. Isn't this perverting the course of justice by deliberately undermining evidence?
Yeah.
It is. So let's look at this horrible picture, because here's David Cameron and Michael Heseltine, of course, upstanding members of the political thing, standing next to Matthew Byrne, Common Purpose leader. So here's political charity Common Purpose, which David Cameron fully supports. He was the man in India selling it effectively to Indian leaders. And Matthew Byrne, what he did to some prostitutes, I'm not going to describe. But what is it about Mr. Cameron? Is he unaware or what? I don't know.
No comment.
We're just minutes silent, I think. And here we are. This is the state of Britain's politicians. This is quite literally sick-making. Sarah Champion, and she says, in response to the independent inquiry, child sexual exploitation in Rotherham, it's absolutely right that the council apologise for their mistakes and accept the report fully, and the leader has taken the right decision to take responsibility and stand down. Child sexual exploitation is a deplorable crime, and there is no excuse for these failures. This is a vile crime and society should not tolerate it. It was right that the council commissioned the report, and I urge the recommendations are fully implemented. Well, of course, the recommendations are not that anybody's brought to trial. The recommendations are let's sweep it under the carpet and make sure nobody goes into court. And I just, from the last bit, it said it uses the word historic. And of course, I think this is one of the key ways of actually burying this stuff. It's not real.
Well, of course, if you lock the records for 80 years, then everything's historic, isn't it?
Oh, but they've done that, Mike, to protect the victims. That's why the records are locked for 80, 90 years. It's to protect the victims. CPS just made a mistake over the Elm House information and Fernbridge.
And it's only the Lord Chancellor who can access those files. The police can't go in if there's an investigation going on?
No, we can't say that. All we can say at the moment is that the National Archives are saying if you ask who holds responsibility for the sealing of those records of abuse, you're going to be looking at the Lord Chancellor.
Right. And we've still had no more report. We've got nothing on an appointment for replacement of Baroness Sloth. There's still nothing in the paper about that.
Well, we did hear a rumour this morning that there may be an appointment of a chairperson to head up the child abuse inquiry next month or within the next couple of months.
I think everyone should maybe get in touch with them and nominate Bill Maloney to head that inquiry.
I think so.
Or yourself.
Or the public needs its own inquiry, and we simply sideline the politicians who are clearly protecting paedophiles. More of it in Milton Keynes, I think.
Milton Keynes, yeah. Councillor Gladstone Mackenzie last week resigned from Milton Keynes Council after it emerged on Friday that Shaban Safiq, who is the Lord Mayor of Milton Keynes, recommended that a man who had been convicted of 4 sexual offences should become a taxi driver. The Mayor apparently has also resigned but has not apologised. Gladstone Mackenzie has apologised. Also to stand down and leave their posts are Sean Burke, who is chairman of the licensing committee. So it's everywhere, isn't it, really?
It's everywhere, and I have to say that quite a few people have asked me what I think is going on. What I think is going on is that the paedophiles have been deliberately encouraged to get into the very public bodies and charities that we think are there to protect children. And the aim of the abuse of children is not only to break down happy families, but also to allow the state to bring social services in to take control of the children. So my personal belief, it's only my personal belief, is that the wave of paedophile activity has been deliberately created and encouraged. And of course, the scale of it at the moment means that it could not possibly have taken place without the knowledge of senior politicians, lords, and of course senior members of Britain's police forces. So if you want to know who is controlling the paedophile rings at the moment, I personally believe it's the British government in its broadest sense. So if the abusers are out there, Robert Greene remains under house arrest. We'd just like to say that aside from the discrimination in court, because Robert was an Englishman and he was in court in Scotland, a few days ago we learnt that Robert had been refused legal aid to defend his name, of course, against charges that he still doesn't know what those charges are. Now remember that Eilish Angelini, who Robert has been in contest with for some time, she was able to use public money to fight her case against Robert. Robert was refused any form of legal aid. Apparently they considered him to be too wealthy, although he doesn't have assets. But this morning there had been an astonishing turnaround, and all of a sudden Robert is now going to be given legal aid. Oh. And we just wonder whether perhaps there's a little bit of unease in the Scottish system, that of course in recent months a lot of evidence has come to the surface which shows unbelievably dirty dealing by police in Scotland, and of course the Scottish legal system which has clearly been acting to protect paedophiles. So little difference whether you live north or south of the border. So Mike, up to you, I think, to tell us what we're going to do about it.
Right, so two conferences, 1st and 2nd November. Now, of course, 1st November, these are both taking place in the Ramada Birmingham Sutton Coldfield Hotel. And on the Saturday, British Constitution Group Conference. These are two separate events, but we're holding them over the same weekend. So you can take advantage of that and stay over the weekend if you like. And really, the point we're making about the 1st of November, of course, is that this is an important day in the history of Britain. On the 1st of November this year, we pass over lawmaking powers to the European Union in 43 policy areas, and we're asking what's going to be next. They've done little things like reducing the power on our vacuum cleaners, but other more important powers are being amended, such as policing, surveillance, restricting energy consumption, and so on. We're suggesting this is major harmonisation with the emphasis on the harm part. Now, of course, our defence on this is information, and so the focus of this day is information about the nature of our constitution, our common law, and why it's so important that the pro-European elites are trying to get rid of both. They're really trying very hard to get rid of both. We will have more information about this conference up on the BCG website this week, but we're still in early days of planning this. And then on the 2nd of November, it's a medical conference, and really talking, this is Graham Downing, who's been on Doomwatch. He was at AV5.
Brilliant.
He's running this conference. He's inviting a number of really high-profile guests over to talk about the issue of how to look after yourself in the event that mainstream medicine isn't doing the job for you anymore. Like I say, these are two separate conferences run by separate organisations, but we've decided between ourselves that we'll hold them on the same weekend because that's probably the most convenient thing for people. I believe that the accommodation is going to be pretty reasonably priced at, I think for a twin or double room, it's going to be something like 60 or 70 quid for the evening, for the night, and that's bed and breakfast. So, if you're able to come to both, that would be fantastic. It's going to be a pretty serious weekend.
And yeah, see there on Drug to Bug, they're looking into Ebola, and apparently human vaccine trials are starting this week for the Ebola, and I believe Graham Downing is all about lack of vitamin C, the Ebola, I do believe. Well,
that's certainly one of the subjects that they're going to be highlighting, sticking to on the Sunday. Now, for tonight, can I just mention that 7:30 we're having the Crane Report, and 9 o'clock Fracking Nightmare. We didn't do them last night because I was away yesterday, so we're going to run those programmes tonight. Ian is going to be talking about Scottish independence on the Crane Report tonight. Please join us.
And final note from me, many people asking about Melanie Shaw. I can tell you that there has been communication with her early this morning. She is still waiting to see what progress is going to be made towards a bail application. But there are a few pieces have got to come into position before that can happen. She has been let out finally from solitary confinement, so she's on a much better, I was going to say ward, what's the right expression? Wing of Peterborough Prison. So there is some relaxation of how she's being treated. There's one or two of the prison warders who are still clearly bullying Melanie. This, of course, is outrageous and should not be permitted. Sodexo Prison, if you're interested in who runs HM Prison Peterborough. But at the moment, all we know is there'll be a further hearing. I think it's the 14th of September for Melanie, probably a case direction hearing, and she's not looking for a trial on the allegation of arson and criminal damage until October. As far as we understand, still no evidence come forward against Melanie, but of course it's the Crown Prosecution Service that is holding Melanie in prison. They are the ones who said, give us enough time and we'll find some evidence against her. The same Crown Prosecution Service, of course, that unfortunately got the evidence wrong with regard to MPs in Elm House. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Just reminding people, bumper stickers and Bradbury Pound t-shirts and other UK column t-shirts are available on the website.
It does make a difference if you buy these, so have a think if you haven't got one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.